Wait till you see the final brilliant move of this exceptional game by Gukesh. And it's not the only brilliant move of the game. There are not one, not two, but three brilliant moves in this game. So it was round 8, Norway chess, Gukesh with white, playing against Aryan Tari, who unfortunately kind of became the whipping boy of the tournament, right? So let's check this one out. D4 on the board, and we see a London system, repopularised lately by Ding Loren, it feels, in the World Championship. So D5 played, E3, and now we get G6, a kind of King's Indian setup playing against the London. Knight F3 now played, Bishop G7, and now Knight BD2, castles and C3. Neither of these moves bad at all, but when you run with the engine, it does want Pawn H3 at some point. And it's playing against Knight to H5, picking up this bishop. Now that could have been played at any point. Gukesh obviously had some ideas there, excuse me, compensation for the bishops. But okay, Tari never plays it, he just cracks on with development, and this is a common idea to fianchetto the bishop if you're not going to bring it to F5, like we often see for black in the London. Now here, Gukesh gets aggressive, chucks Harry the H-pawn down the board, right? What does he want to do? Checkmate the black king if possible. So Tari, he counters in the centre. Always a good policy when you're getting attacked on a flank. We now see Knight E5. I mean, a great square for the knight, of course, but it also opens up the queen. And there's some move order nuances here, which is quite interesting, because this knight lands on C6 in a few moves' time, because knight B to D7 is played here, best move, but it got me wondering, well, what if you started here with bishop to B7? Well, the problem with this is now you can crack on with pawn to H5. A thematic exchange sacrifice here, but rather than capturing this pawn back immediately, bishop D3 is actually the strongest move, because you come onto this diagonal, and if C4, you drop back to C2. You know, you're still on the diagonal, and you're threatening to then take here, and there's lots of pressures, nasty stuff around the king. But if you imagine this same position on the board here, but the bishop back on C8 and the knight on D7, well then you can take on E5, pawn recaptures, and the bishop springs out from C8 to G4. Interrupts all of those attacking ideas. You know, you have to go F3 or drop the bishop back, whatever. So this is one of the reasons why you don't start with bishop B7, but you start with this one. But here's the subtle difference. Now after bishop E2, threatening H5, well here, H5 is played by Tari to shut it down, and you're allowed to now go knight to C6, there's no bishop on B7. So it kicks this queen to an uncomfortable square. By the way, the computer didn't want that as its top move, it wanted this. But I like how Gukesh goes here, just sort of muddying the waters and going for this B4 move. Playing on both sides of the board now, gaining space. Now, black, how to respond? You can take this pawn or this pawn, but that pawn structure doesn't exactly help black. You open the C file for the rook and so on and so forth, and if you shut down with C4, well, B5 can always come, you can start running the A pawn. Different games, right? Tari instead goes knight G4, and it's the best move. Really nice idea, opening the bishop, also the knight to support this square, and it's all geared up to playing pawn to E5. So if, for example, here, where are we? You push F3 to try and kick away that knight, well then E5 comes on the board anyway, because you don't have time to take here, or black takes here, and the position opening up like this actually favours black, the king stuck in the centre. And if instead you drop that bishop back, well, you've just left this pawn. That's a huge problem. Much better for black. So you don't have time to kick away this knight, and equally you can't simply chop it and win a pawn, or then there's knight f6. You hit the queen, after it retreats, you're going to lose this knight here, or you have to give it up like this, kind of kamikaze move. So knight g4, great move, preparing e5. How does Gukesh respond? Well, castles. Best move, e5 still comes on the board, and Gukesh calmly retreats his bishop, leaves that tension in the centre, and now it just grows and grows in a really interesting way. So you can take here, nothing wrong with that, different kind of game, but Tari goes queen e6. hits that knight, which is a bit out on a limb. So we see pawn b5 covering it, and now bishop b7 pressuring, threatening to win a pawn, and c4 now played, really stirring things up. Now, the minute you do that and you weaken this pawn triangle here, it begs the question, well, what happens if you play something like this, takes on d4? Well, the problem is you take on d5 and there's tactics in the air because queen recaptures, runs into this check, you pick up the queen. So this is one of the problems, and therefore after that one's taken, you know, the queen would have to come somewhere passive, e8, etc. You can take on d4, just a really good game for white. So this is the problem. If you take here in either of those ways, we take here. So instead, Tari plays the best move, captures that pesky knight, the pawn recaptures, hitting this one, and now you might think queen takes, and it is the best move, but it's not obvious why it's the best move, and that's why Tari didn't play it. Now if you go in for this one, well, you have to calculate what happens after takes. Now this time if you take, okay, there's no knight e7 check, but you're running into bishop f3. If e4, you still take with the bishop, you know, the knight's covering as well. And after the queen goes, you win an exchange. White's slightly better, although black does have chances because of all this pressure here, you know, quite a presence in the center with the pawns. Anyway, that's why Tari didn't take this one, walking into this, but actually it is the top computer line. The computer then says go queen b7 because now white has to do something about the pressure here, takes on e5 as the top move, and you get a line like this where the pawns are actually equal here, even though white's got this passed one, and okay, black's definitely got play, you know, there's an x-ray here and different things going on. That was the way to go, but the knight hopped away from the attack of the pawn. Now it does cover this central one a bit, and I guess Tari was expecting here, but now look at this for a move from Gukesh. He plays pawn to e4. I'm not sure I've ever actually seen a game where you have that trio of pawns staring at each other. You know, that's just awesome to see on the board, right? And again, there's just so much going on. Now you can quickly rule out either takes here or takes here, because simply white takes here, sets up this connect 3, and that's really good for white. Better than black's pawn chain, even though that looks good too. So that's why there's no takes on this one. And if instead you take here, well again, you know, you're allowing white to take with the tempo, and then they can always take here, etc. So you quickly realise you have to take on e4 in one manner or another, but here Tari gets it really wrong. So he should take with the pawn for the key reason that now this knight blocks the queen and it doesn't really have a good square to go to. So you can go d5, yes, the queen can retreat, yes, but what's the next move? You know, like I said, the knight just hasn't been cleared out of the way, the pawns aren't yet rolling in the same manner, you know, this one's on here and stuff. Anyway, what we see in the game is knight takes on e4. The big difference now is that you can take on d5. Sorry, you might be thinking takes here first, then d5. But actually, it's not as precise because white's getting counterplay, big clump of pawns. But what you do instead is take first, queen recaptures, now take this knight, force the queen to move again and pawn d5. And because the knights have cleared out of the way, look at these pawns absolutely rolling, plus all of this stuff on the cards as well. So knight f6 comes back, pressures this pawn. We get bishop f3, the queen goes, and now d6, c7, a huge threat, opening up this bishop. So e4 looks to squash it, but guess what? You've just opened up a new monster on this diagonal. Now the bishop drops back. Knight d5 tries to block that d file and opens the bishop on this a1 rook. Also looks at knight c3, and after rook c1, the knight does move, but not to c3. And you can probably guess what Gukesh's response would have been here, right? If this was on the board, well, rook takes on c3 is the move. Keep the initiative, keep the pawns rolling, and they are just absolutely deadly. You know, the bishop can even block the file, but then the light squares are a huge issue. This bishop pair is just killing it in combination with the pawns. Won't keep going on that line. We see something similar in the game. So knight b4 played, looking at a2, maybe d3, but c7, the pawns rumbling on. Now, we see this one captured soon, but not yet. Bishop d4 is played to block the file. But if you try for this one, you do pick up one of the bishops. You did have other moves, but this is one of the top ways, but still queen a4. And there's still big invasion problems. This one's pretty well controlled by the rooks. Still white is ahead. I mean, these are just so commanding. So instead, we see bishop d4 to stop the queen supporting that d-pawn, but queen a4 anyway. And there's now a threat of pawn to a3 and queen c6, you know, invading into the position. So many threats. So a6 is now played. Now if you go a3, well, there's b5, intermediate move, kick the queen away, then you can move the knight and the queen's not invading. So what does Gukesh do? Well, he goes pawn d7. Now, why would you do that? Because now there's b5, interrupting the connection of the queen with the pawn. You're about to lose that one. Well, can you guess what Gukesh played here, the first of his brilliant moves in this game? So, the move that Gukesh played is bishop takes on b5, smashing through. Hang on, why would you give up one of your beautiful bishops? Well, it's all about tactics. And if you've got positional trumps, you don't want to give them up, but you do if then you've got a follow-up blow. What's the second brilliant move? Well, you probably guessed it. It was in the thumbnail. Queen takes on a8. Double exclam, giving the queen, but actually it's not a true, genuine queen sack because it's completely immune. You then make a new queen. Not on c8 because the queen's covering back, but on d8, right? And then you're just game over. Okay, completely up, what, a rook up or something? Anyway, so we didn't have captures here. Instead, the queen picks up on d7. This queen now slides back to e4, picks up that pawn, and there's threats growing in the position. The rook takes on a2. Sorry, the knight takes on a2, hits the rook. Rook e1 played, hitting the open file. There is a threat here to go queen e7, start exchanging, then maybe, you know, rook d7 to d8, that kind of thing. So we see bishop f6 covering, and the rook now hits the open d file. Bishop d4 back. Does Gukesh just repeat? Well, of course not. He goes queen c2, hits this knight, and it asks a very awkward question. Because you can't go knight c3 or simply takes, bishop captures, you pick up the queen, game over, and you can't go knight b4 due to a similar theme. This time you crash through on c5, bishop captures, and again just completely winning for white. So that's why we see queen to e6 covering the knight, but what do you do after the queen is attacked? And there's just no good square. We see the queen come here in the game because if queen d5, again, you just smash and grab, brutal stuff. If pawn recaptures, this one goes through. And if queen recaptures, well, you've just left the defense of your knight, so that one drops. Again, you're what? A bishop up for the sake of a pawn, plus this is the most deadly pawn. So instead, queen c4, forced. This one's taken. The pawns are smashed up. Now bishop d6 hits the rook, it goes to c8, and can you see the final move of the game, another brilliancy, forced resignation. So the move that was played is bishop takes on c5, and we saw resignation. If you capture, then simply check. The king goes and you pick up the rook, completely winning. And if you take, well, okay, we make a queen, again, completely winning. And if you don't take the bishop, you just take the pawn. Well, okay, now we pick up here on however you want to do it. Actually, no, you do have to go with the bishop, but game over, right? So what a beautiful game from D. Gukesh, who finished third in the tournament. And if you want to check out another exceptional one from him, then see the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.